literally a number of verses in the passage that I read this morning that speaks volumes. As a matter of fact, I have preached a number of sermons, entire sermons, on a number of these individual verses. And the Lord willing, I will do so next week. I plan to return and preach on verse 34 by itself. But as I was looking at this passage this past week, I began to realize something. There is a message in the larger context here. We begin to move from the darkness at midday to a note of triumph in the centurion's voice at the close of the crucifixion. Now it's true, his understanding is limited, but still we begin to see what looked like an apparent tragedy becoming a triumph. It's not unlike the Battle of Waterloo. Understand that it was June the 18th, 1815. Art Ross was just a corporal in the army at that time. And he was having breakfast with Napoleon. And Napoleon said that the day was going to bring an easy victory. That the Duke of Wellington was an inferior general leading an inferior army, and victory was assured. The only means of communication back to Great Britain across the English Channel was a rather crude set of lights that would flash the message back across. Well, at the close of the day, the message was received: Wellington defeated. Despair and panic spread throughout the British Empire. But what they didn't understand is that a heavy fog had come in just at the moment that they were beginning to flash that message across the English Channel. And the entire message read, Wellington defeated Napoleon. In the cross, it looked like the devil gained the upper hand. It looked like he had won, only to discover that it was at the cross that he had met his Waterloo, his ultimate defeat. And again, the centurion doesn't understand all that's going on, but we do see the movement through this passage, and through these events, God begins to reveal his plan for our salvation throughout all eternity. And this particular passage, this paragraph, begins with the darkness in verse 33. Darkness covered the face of the land from 12 noon until roughly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It was a supernatural darkness. It has been amazing to me at how different individuals try to explain in a logical, scientific way some of the miracles of the Bible. And many want to argue that this was some kind of natural phenomenon. And the most common is that it was an eclipse of the sun. Lisa, did you get the Revised Version? All right. It's been a long time since I was in college and studied astronomy. So I went back and I kind of refreshed my own memory with some things. And I don't want to insult your intelligence, but I want to show you something. Now, remember that when Jesus was crucified, it was a particular time of year, and we're told point blank when it was. It was Passover. Do you know what Passover is based on? The moon. Same with our Easter. Have you ever noticed it doesn't come the second Sunday in April every year? You know why? It is the first full moon after the spring equinox. So remember that it was a full moon. Now I've got this up here backwards, but here's your eclipse. You have the sun. That's that big yellow thing down here. We haven't seen it in a few days, so I wanted to tell you what it looked like. Then you have the moon. Then you have the earth, and I hope you can see that little dark spot there on the African continent. That is the solar eclipse. You see that? But just remember, sun, moon, earth. All right, now let's go to a full moon. I wished I could have found one that was just like this one, but I couldn't. Okay. Here you have the sun. Ignore the new moon. Here's the earth. Here's the full moon. Do you notice something? Sun, earth, moon. On an eclipse, you have sun, moon, earth. It's the very opposite of having a solar eclipse. I want to tell you, if we have a solar eclipse with a full moon, that's some more miracle, right? It could not have been an eclipse. Well, there are those that say, well, it was a dust storm, a sandstorm. Now, they have some mighty, vicious, blinding sandstorms in Arabia and in Egypt because that is a desert area. But I had the opportunity to visit the Holy Land, and there's not a lot of sand there. There's a whole lot of rocks, big rocks. And if those rocks get to blowing around, you're not going to see any light, but it's not because the sun's darkened out if one hits you in the head, right? Now, they might have had some type of light sandstorm, but nothing that would have caused any real reaction, and to be noteworthy of that it was dark from noon until 3 when the sun was at its highest. The only logical explanation is that there is no logical explanation. Write that down. You see, in our age, we want to explain things scientifically. Sometimes God throws us a monkey wrench just to prove that science isn't God. But now, we need to ask something else. Wouldn't have been any big deal for God to make it dark for 3 hours in the middle of the day, but still, why did He do it? It has to have a reason. So not only is it a supernatural darkness, it is a symbolic darkness. I think there are two dangers today with men in the pulpit. One is we want to explain it away and say that the historicity of it doesn't matter. Yes, it does, and we go on and say what it means. Or we defend that it was a real event and don't bother to tell what it means. This means something. This had a real purpose. The darkness is a message itself. To begin to understand it, just recall that when Jesus was born, He was born into darkness of the night. And there was a supernatural light. You remember that? Now here Jesus is hanging on the cross in the light. And a supernatural darkness is covering the face of the earth. You don't have to be a profound theologian to begin to figure that out on your own, I hope. Jesus, the light of the world, came to this world of darkness as the light of the world. But now He's hanging on the cross, and sinful man is doing his best to extinguish that light. And God is telling us that indeed it is a dark day when man rejects the perfect Son of God. But there's another element to this darkness. Darkness is also a symbol of judgment. You recall in the 10 plagues to Egypt, one of them was a plague of darkness. It was a symbol that God's judgment was about to fall upon those that had rejected God Almighty. Here it is a day of darkness. Then there's this desolation. Verse 34 and 35 and 36, when Jesus cries out from the cross. As I said, I really plan to preach on this next Sunday, so just a couple of things. First, there's this misunderstanding. Matthew and Mark record this event, and both stress that Jesus is misunderstood. Now, if you're a real astute Bible student, and I hope you are because there's nothing in there to be afraid of, and you turn to Matthew, it says Eli, 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 lama sabachthani. Here in Mark, it says Eloi, E-L-I-O. Eli is Hebrew. Eloi is Aramaic, daily Hebrew. Then why the difference? Who do you think gave Jesus a drink on that sponge? A Roman soldier, but no one allowed to get to the cross. He didn't understand Hebrew or Aramaic. And next week, if you get to see that clip from the position, one thing that when a person is crucified and they're suffering dehydration, their mouth gets dry and the tongue is swollen and the throat nearly closes shut. That's the reason he was given a drink before he shouted. That voice would have been raspy. They didn't understand Hebrew or Aramaic, either one. They just heard Eli and they thought of Elijah. And maybe this is not all that important, but I began to wonder, why does Matthew and Mark both stress that Jesus was misunderstood? Just to explain the saying? I don't think so. You know, Jesus is so often misunderstood. He was misunderstood on the cross. He's misunderstood today. But now the message. This much is clear. He died a God-forsaken death for you and me. The darkness had a thrill to it that day. My God, why have you forsaken me? And then in verse 37, the death. He breathed his last. I want to suggest to you, first of all, that it was voluntary. It was voluntary because of the things that he said earlier. He stated point blank, no one takes my life from me. I lay it down. If I lay it down, I'll take it up again. And there were times when they thought they had Jesus trapped and they were going to go ahead and arrest him. That's the reason they had this plot. They had been burnt one too many times. And Jesus wasn't ready. He just disappeared. But now, when he was there in the Garden of Gethsemane, after praying those 3 times, he says, the time's come. My hour's here. Wake up, guys. Let's go. And when Peter was going to deliver him, you see, by giving Malchus' servant that haircut, he said, put your sword up. It's now time for me to go to the cross. But we know not only because of what he said earlier, but because of what he says right here. You see, the writer says that he gave out this loud cry and breathed his last. We put it together with the synoptics. Literally, he dismissed his spirit. Have you had the unfortunate event to see someone die? I've seen a lot more than I'd like. I recall a story a number of years ago that was told for true, and it sounds true. Probably it happens on a fairly regular basis. A man was in the hospital visiting his friend. Something happened to this friend, and he was in a great deal of pain, and he began to shout at the top of his voice, I'm dying, I'm dying, I'm dying. Well, this man got kind of excited, and he ran out in the hall, and he saw a doctor, and he grabbed him, and he says, come on, my friend's dying. You know how independent these old doctors can be, right? That doctor was just taking his merry time, walking on down the hall to the room, and he said, come on, don't you hear him? He said, yeah, I hear him. He said, well, he's dying. He said, you've never seen anyone die, have you? I remember when my father died, I watched as the monitor of his heartbeat got farther and farther apart, and the little bars got lower and lower. Respiration, Father. There wasn't any yelling, any screaming. Just stop.